Hola a todas y todos y bienvenidos a esta última edición de nuestra temporada de conciertos digital, Sigma Orionis. Este va a ser el último concierto y tenemos preparado un evento para lo que va a ser el último encuentro de nuestra temporada. Y en esta ocasión estamos especialmente contentos de presentar la obra que hemos estado trabajando con Lisa Lim, compositora australiana, que tenemos ahora aquí, estamos conectados con ella. La obra es Ash, Music for the Eremozoic, y, ya pues vamos a dejar que Lisa nos hable, nos presente la pieza que hemos estado trabajando con ella. Hello, Lisa, how are you?
Very well. Lovely to join you now over Zoom.
Thank you very much for being with us and for this beautiful piece that we worked together.
Great. I'm really looking forward to hearing it. I remember we met in Bilbao 2.5 years ago now, and that was such a beautiful meeting. And I'm very happy to have been able to write a piece, and now that it's coming to performance.
Yes, 2.5 years
Mm.
after.
Yes,
This
yes,
is
but the world has changed so much in this
yeah,
time.
there's so much indeed. Yes.
Mm. Yeah.
So, and what can you say to
Mm.
our audience to about the piece about
Yes,
Ash?
yes, it has a rather unusual title, this ash music for the Eremozoic, and the Eremozoic is defined as this idea in a time of mass extinction, as this age of loneliness, when so many beings and creatures are departing from the earth. And so I was really reflecting on particular events in Australia, these massive bushfires that wiped out land and animals and insects and birds and so on. But really thinking about how to respond in a time which is just so desperate and so, kind of beyond our comprehension. And one thing was this idea of witness. And so the piece is kind of a listening, it's a witness, and it's made up of three parts. The first part is called sacrament. It is this kind of sacredness of listening and being with, and just trying to be present with everything around us. The second part is called residua, and this deals with the theme of time. This part of the piece is made up of these kind of pulsations, these very kind of skeletal, bone-like, you know, pulsations. They're hard to understand, perhaps, right? It's like
Yes,
this
yes,
idea
indeed.
of fossilized time
Our
that I
tongue
that I had.
also. Our tongue.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, all these tongue slaps
Yeah.
from the quartet. And then the final part is called Night Sky with Wildflowers, and that's about resonance. And it's the way in which resonance is a way of reaching out, and connecting with the environment. So those are some of the themes in the piece.
Thank you very much. So we're gonna listen to the piece, and after we will have a, a conversation between Alberto Bernal and Lisa, more in a musicological way. Muy bien, querido público, pues continuamos con el concierto, con la grabación de Ash, Music for the Hermosoic, por parte de Sigma Project, en el maravilloso marco del Museo Chillida Leku en Hernani.
Bueno, pues acabamos de escuchar esta obra de Lisa Lim, a quien tenemos también aquí amablemente para continuar esta conversación. Como comentaba Ángel Soria al principio, Ash, Music for the Eremozoic, Ceniza, música para el Eremozoico. Y sobre esta obra y lo que de ella se deriva, vamos a conversar en unos breves minutos con Lisa Lim, con lo que cambiaremos ahora nuestro idioma al inglés. So good afternoon, Lisa, and a pleasure to have you here and to start this conversation about this beautiful piece that we just heard in this also very, very excellent recording concert by Sigma Project. So the first thing that I would like to introduce, you were already talking about that in the introduction before the piece started, is this idea of the Eremozoic. This is literally the age of loneliness or the era of loneliness. And I would like to read the quotation of the book by E.O. Wilson, The Creation, An Appeal to Save Life on Earth, in order to ask you how do you proceed with the writing or the conception of the piece after this, maybe I say inspiration or thinking about our relationship to the earth. So the quotation is like that: the human hammer having fallen, the sixth mass extinction has begun. This spasm of permanent loss is expected, if it is not abated, to reach the end of Mesozoic level by the end of the century. We will then enter what poets and scientists alike may choose to call the Eremozoic era, the age of loneliness. So how does this relate particularly maybe to your music in general? Because I think that this is not the first time that you were concerned about these ideas, and also particularly to this piece that we just heard.
Yes, thank you, Alberto, for these questions. I mean, they're very big questions. And in a way, in maybe the last 5 years, there's been very widespread kind of awareness of what's also been called the Anthropocene, this idea that human activity is like a geologic epoch, that humans are actually affecting at a planetary scale, these kind of massive changes and extinctions. And for me, it's certainly been a theme that I've reflected on in a number of pieces. And the part that gives me hope, actually, and this is also important as an artist, where is the hope in amongst these terrible kind of stories, is that one place for hope is about shifting our orientation beyond the human, right? So it's not just having the humans somehow at the top of the hierarchy, but really seeing, moving to what I think of as an ecological register, is that we are just one kind of person in a world of many other kinds of persons. So for me, there's a real sort of strong ethical aspect. If we say animals, and birds and insects are persons, with their own, kind of lives and subjectivities and, ways, but more than just those kinds of persons. I mean, plants as persons, elements as person, the weather, even ideas. So you see, it's a very broad sense of the way in which we're profoundly interconnected, ways in which humans are profoundly interconnected. And so every action that we take is already, kind of bouncing out and, in a huge feedback loop with everything else out there. So I've made a lot of pieces which is really about trying to find a way of understanding. So using music as a way of trying to understand these kinds of ecological thinking, which deprioritizes the human. Looking for poetics of this type of relationship. So in relation to the saxophone quartet, I mean, in a way, I begin very simply, you know, because you have four amazing musicians who are such incredible poets of their instruments, and I begin the piece in a way I call listening to and witnessing from the instrument. So using the instrument as a way of listening to the world. And so the piece begins as this just following the grain, following the sort of resonances and the resistances, which are just quite simply in a way inside instruments and bodies. So it is already this kind of ecology that's happening there in the microcosm. So that's one of the ways in which I work.
Yeah, this is something that I was thinking when I came to this piece, to the score, and to the listening. In this first movement, that you write, you talk about that you are proceeding nor in a kind of architectural in design, but more like textile, like, and I'm thinking about if we translate this to life, does this means that that could be like to think in a life like more local, more related to our environment, to the things that surround us, rather than in a, so to say, geopolitical way to think. This architectural of thinking about things maybe in an abstract or structural way, and not really about this manual, instrumental, this surrounding of us, our species.
I don't sort of see them as necessarily mutually exclusive, you know, the local and the global. I mean, that's the secret to the ecological thing, right? Here I am in Australia, and even using my computer and this electricity, you know, is just part of a global interconnection with everything that's happening on your side of the world. So, you know, I try not to get too kind of fixed, you know, in terms of local or global, or that's the micro is not connected to the macro. But certainly, you know, that word you use, textilic, this idea of the fabric, you know, strings and weaving, I find that language very useful. And so if I speak also about architectures, I also like to use those kinds of terms, you know, this idea that, you know, when you say the word building block, right, immediately that kind of language starts to separate things.
Yeah.
You think, you know, like the image making is of a block and its separateness, and then
yeah. And that there is no detail, or that the detail is not interconnected with the structure, or
yeah, so that it's a kind of geometrical thinking, which can be really useful. It's great, but then, you know, you can still have a wall made up of bricks, but when you change your focus to the mortar, the thing that binds the bricks, that is the beginning of this more textilic thinking, right? So what is the intra, you know, kind of connection between these things? So it shifts the kind of the way in which you think about forces in the world and the kinds of relationships that are available in that relationship. So I like to use, or part of my artistic practice is about using language as these kind of forms of analysis. So because in a way I could say storytelling is a sort of analysis, right? Because the story you tell already starts to create your reality. It's the way in which you see the world. You can see some things, but then you can't see other things, you know? And I find it very intriguing, this idea that underneath everything, there's also another thing, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Okay. I would also like to ask you that I guess that you started the piece and you relate also that, to these bushfires in Australia in 2019. So that I guess that maybe this is like a kind of beginning. So that when you began the piece, it was like the context, and then suddenly for the whole world came this COVID-19 pandemic that affected the way we relate, also the way we think, and how this affected your writing of the music, because I guess that you were writing this piece during the pandemic, so starting from a context that maybe it was very different from the context that we have now 2 months after the piece was premiered. So how did this affect to this writing?
Yes. I mean, there are some things about the piece that point to the these really massive wildfires, which we are seeing everywhere in the world, whether it's in Spain or Scandinavia or California, where these fires that consume everything, and they're so massive they create their own weather systems. The way in which the air is laden with smoke and ash, the previously living things we are breathing in. And so this thing of breathing in and out the environment, which I also think about, in terms of the instrument, this microcosm of the instrument that is in this continuous exchange of air, with everything around, and with the members of the quartet, and with an audience perhaps, and strangely that's a theme that became so huge during COVID, the danger of breathing with other people.
Yeah.
That's kind of crazy thing. Who could have ever imagined such a thing? So in a way, I saw a kind of real connection. These things are not separate. These kind of global phenomena are not in one place, and not, again, this ecological idea, right? Things are not at all separate. And then also the theme of loneliness, this way in which the pandemic has just transformed societal, structures.
Yeah, actually, yeah, of course, the loneliness, no, this is something that is present in the very definition of Remozoic, and is like the state of the art right now of how things are, that we are like around ourselves, and yes, actually there is one moment in the piece that I especially like, and that I'm really concerned about this idea of loneliness, and this is in the second movement that we have, I measured it, and we have 8 minutes of slaps, like very mechanic, like you wrote that these are like a kind of fossil side time snapshots or something like that. And then after these 8 minutes, it emerges a kind of melodic, I don't know how to call it, maybe lament, like very short. And then again, the slaps and the movement finishes. And it makes me think in a very strong way of this loneliness of in this devastated landscape of things, that suddenly there is this voice. I don't know if you were talking about storytelling before, if this is something that that I'm thinking about myself, or how did you think this relation? Because I really like this place of the piece.
Well, I like your story. I think that's great. And actually, I wanted to ask you, because I know that this theme of time is very important in your work as well, this time of acceleration and perhaps alienation. So I was very interested to see that, and the way in which you work with metronomic time. I mean, I think as composers, this kind of materiality of time is very interesting. You know, it really is one of the media of of music. And so for me, this is, yeah, this notion of time, the way in which we slip in and out of different experiences
Mhm.
of time, especially in this globalized, you know, kind of situation where we can zoom in and out of different, you know, kinds of news cycles and information, and at the same time we have our own sort of personal lived time, and then the kind of disaster time of the Anthropocene.
Mhm.
You know, for me, these kind of create a lot of, I guess, both questions and themes and materials for music. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, actually, yeah, I really like this movement. I have to say, and when you were talking about this acceleration thing, that also play a role in some of my pieces. One of them played by a Sigma project called A Tempo.
Mm,
If you wanna
mm,
know more, I'm talking about people right now, about the people who are listening. But anyway, that
mm,
these strands of slabs that are like accelerating and slowing down. Yeah, maybe it's also like it's very strong for me, this feeling of time, of stamps of time, and yeah, maybe I can read it also related to this paradigm of society of acceleration that it's also
mm,
very present in our lives right now, that
mm,
we are in a pandemic and we cannot stop. We can keep consuming and doing things and etc.
mm, mm.
I don't know how what do you think about that, or how did you live this situation in terms of this time paradigm
Mm,
of
You know, the complexity of time that we're encountering in our everyday lives puts a lot of pressure on
mm,
our cognitive process. You know, we really I find it very hard to process and keep kind of on track. I find myself going into these vortices of distraction, and vortices of, you know, just kind of sudden loss of energy. These kinds of things, which I think people can relate to in some way. But yes, we somehow have to endure time as well in order to live. And that was one of the things I really appreciated and loved about this concert, which was in this amazing museum, and surrounded by the work of Eduardo Chida. You know, which also for me speaks to this, you know, this kind of monumentality and at this, you know, of materials, you know, these kind of stones and
mm,
these memories that are held in them. So this sort of time that's held in elements, and then also a very human scale. So I thought that was just incredibly beautiful.
mm. Yeah, actually, I think that it is really a very good frame, this Chillida Museum, for this work. So because I'm not an expert in Chillida, but I really like the way, yeah, as you said, he works with large scale works, and also with human scale works, and how this has a kind of link, I could say, between a kind of primitivism and our actual way of life, or way to perceive things. And I think that, yeah, it's a really good frame for your piece.
Mm, mm,
Um, and
yeah.
um, so yeah, we could continue like much longer. I had like a couple of questions here more for you, but I
Okay.
think if we are talking about time, we probably have also to
Okay.
think
All right.
about
Yes.
the time of this
Yeah.
conversation not to be
Yeah.
very long.
Mm,
So yeah, it was a pleasure. Lisa, to have this short conversation and of course your music, and we encourage the audience that is hearing now to know more in detail your work, not only this work but other works, and be aware of your performances. Lisa has a very complete website where you can really read interviews with her and read articles about things that we were talking about right now, with many examples of music, and yeah, you can go there and keep knowing more in detail Lisa Lim. So thank you very much for this conversation, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you very much. What a pleasure. Bye-bye.
And thank you very much also to Sigma Project for this invitation to have this conversation. Muchas gracias Ángel Soria, Andrés Gómez, Alberto Chávez y a José Chu. Bueno, pues para terminar, como es habitual, pasamos ya la palabra a Andrés Gómez, que os dará su tip habitual. Muchas gracias y hasta pronto.
Hola a todos. En el tip de hoy trataremos las técnicas instrumentales utilizadas por Lisa Lim en su obra As. La compositora parte de un enfoque del saxofón muy orgánico. Focaliza toda su atención en el interior del tubo sonoro. Lisa se imagina moviendo los dedos a través de las llaves del saxofón mientras surgen líneas y fluidos sonoros. La música se crea sintiendo el camino a lo largo de las fisuras y las resonancias del propio instrumento. En este gran ecosistema saxofonístico que Lisa Lim nos invita a transitar, aparecen técnicas instrumentales que ya han sido tratadas en nuestros anteriores tips. Por ejemplo, los multifónicos. O los cierres en serie. También la flexibilidad de embocadura. O el bisbigliando. Por supuesto, el aire como materia compositiva. Y el slap, que aparece en una sección bastante amplia de la obra As. Pero hay una técnica que es nueva. El tercer tiempo de la obra es un gran solo de saxofón barítono, el cual lleva acoplado a su campana un spring drum. Este instrumento de percusión es un tubo que en uno de los extremos se cierra con un parche tensado, desde el cual pende un alambre en espiral que vibra cuando lo agitamos o cuando golpeamos el tubo. Su sonido es realmente muy interesante. acoplarlo a la campana del saxofón funciona como un resonador. Escuchamos un ejemplo acoplando el spring drum a la campana del saxofón alto. Cuando creamos la columna de aire en el saxofón, esta estimula al spring drum y aparecen resonancias nunca antes escuchadas. Y bien, con esto acabamos el tip de hoy. Muchas gracias por vuestra atención. Os emplazamos para nuestra próxima entrega de Sigma Orionis el próximo 25 de marzo, la cual tendrá un especial significado para nosotros. Será nuestro último concierto de temporada. Y para la ocasión hemos preparado algo diferente. No te lo pierdas. Y ya sabéis, si estáis interesados en descubrir todos los proyectos generados por Sigma Project, suscribíos a nuestro canal de YouTube y activad las notificaciones. Así os llegarán todas las novedades que estamos preparando con mucho cariño para vosotros. Hasta pronto.